The others just say, you know, he was baptized. They may give one or two details, but Matthew gives a lot of details about the baptism of Jesus Christ. And as I do this every week or I do it a lot of times on Sunday when I'm preparing a sermon. I think, okay, I've got my outline, here it is. But then when I start looking up references and looking up incidences and history and different things, I end up with twice as many notes as I planned to. Then I have to go back and either split the sermon, make two sermons, or cut something out. I started looking. My original intentions were strictly to look at the baptism, look at a couple of major points. But then as I began looking more in depth into it, I realized baptism itself is very, very important. I wish every one of our members were here. Maybe I should preach this on a Sunday morning so that more people will hear it. But there are people who believe and preach and teach that baptism isn't really important. In fact, there are religions and individuals, just get them saved. Get them saved, that's all that matters. Baptism is an option, but you get them saved. Even if they're never baptized, at least get them saved so they'll go to heaven. Then there are those who believe, get people saved. That's the most important thing in their mind. Get them saved, and then I've actually heard them say, once they're saved, join the church of your choice. If you're a Catholic, join the Catholic Church. But at least you're saved. And as long as you're saved, join the Methodist Church, the Church of Christ. Join any church that makes you happy, but at least you're saved and you're going to heaven, whichever denomination you join. Then there are those who believe that you can be baptized. By the way, how many of you know the three different types of so-called baptism? One of them is what we do. It's called immersion or burial in baptism. What's another one? Sprinkling. That's where they do it a lot with babies, but there's some religions that do it for adults. They'll take a little canister of water, pour it in their hand, dip their fingers, and sprinkle it on top of you. And that's baptism in their mind. You're baptized because we sprinkled water on top of you. Then the other is pouring. Very similar to sprinkling, except they'll take a little, I call it a syrup thing. It's got a handle and a little spout. We used to use it to pour syrup. They put holy water in it, and they'll take it, and you'll bend over a bowl of some kind, and they'll pour it on you, and that's baptism in their church. So we got sprinkling, pouring, and full immersion. Now, does it matter where you are immersed? I knew a lady years ago. God saved her, and she could afford it. She wanted to fly her and the pastor over to Israel so she could be baptized in the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. Is that any more baptism than what we have here? Were any of you baptized in a creek? Y'all may have been. Yeah, I was baptized in a creek. In fact, in college, we had to practice and learn how to baptize in a creek because baptismals, baptistries like ours were very rare. And there's a lot of secrets to baptizing in a creek. You want to make sure when you take them down, the current is coming from your right, so the current helps them stand up. If you do it the other way, you're trying to bring them up and the current's pushing them down and you're trying to bring them up. So even in college, we had to learn certain tricks. You want to make sure that you're not standing on a slippery rock, because when you go down, you both go down. But what makes a baptistry better than a creek? Well, yeah, do what, Gary? Convenience. Kathy hit the one I was thinking. We have a thermostat that controls the temperature. How many of you were present when Jesse Dalton was baptized? You were. Well, in the old building, we didn't have a water heater. We didn't have hot water. We filled the baptistry up. It was down in the floor, right behind where the choir used to be. It was down in the floor. I would go over Saturday, fill it up, and then we would put stick a heater down in it, a water heater, turn it on, and it would heat the water by Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, Jessie had all of her family, had all kinds of family and friends, and I come in Sunday morning, and the electric did not turn on when I hit the switch. And it was dead of winter. So I felt the water, and it was ice cold. So I went to Jessie, and I said, the water is ice cold. She said, I've got my family here. I've got all my friends here. She said, I can take it if you can. And it was like we stepped down into the water. Was her baptism any better or any worse because it was ice cold? How many of you remember, well, most of you wouldn't. In fact, the only one that would be my wife probably. Did you ever know Brother Ginn, the former pastor? Okay. He was originally pastor at Big Bone Baptist, which is, Big Bone Baptist Church is still there, but they built a new building. I preached there when Brother Ginn was pastor, back in the old building. They did not have an indoor baptistry. You came out the front door of the church, and about 100 yards down on the property, they had a trap door that they would pull open, and there was your baptistry outside in the ground. And the Sunday I was there, they had a baptismal, and it was 50,000 below zero. I mean, it was cold. And Brother Ginn walked down in the ground. The lady came down, he baptized her. They got up and had to walk all the way back to the church in wind cold water or air. But was that any better baptism? No, baptism is not a location. I remember growing up, there was some preachers that were anti-baptistry because it was too modernistic. That's going modern, and so they were against the baptistry. I personally like it, especially this one. I set the thermostat, and the next morning it's the exact right temperature. I like convenience, personally. But it isn't being baptized in the Jordan River. I was baptized, I could probably take you to it, but I don't remember the name of the creek. But I know where it was. and it was a nice sunny day in August and beautiful weather. But some people say that you can be baptized by immersion, by pouring, or by sprinkling. By the way, do you know why they switched from immersion to sprinkling? Do you know who switched it and why? Do what? Catholics, yes. Why? That's a nice guess, but they believe that baptism was necessary for salvation. You have to be baptized as a Catholic to make certain that you eventually end up in heaven. And they wanted all babies to go to heaven. And so as soon as they could, as soon as a baby was born, they would take that baby and immerse it. Well, babies don't know how to hold their breath, and so, there was a lot of spitting and sputtering and near drownings. So the Catholic Church decided, we've got to make this so babies don't drown. And they came up with sprinkling primarily because they were baptizing babies so that babies could eventually go to heaven, eventually. Well, I depart. Let's see if we can get back, at least get the introduction in. Other churches believe that baptism is one of the 7 sacraments that you need to fulfill in order to go to heaven. The first one is baptism. That's why if you're not baptized, you probably are not going to heaven, which is why they baptize babies as soon as possible. So baptism is the first sacrament on your way to being saved. Confirmation takes place around the age of 12, where you become an adult and where you are allowed to take the Eucharist for the first time, which is simply what we would call the Lord's Supper. They call it the Eucharist, which is where they actually get to take the wafer and get their first drink of, their first legal drink of wine. And then, after that, you start going to confession. And I think I probably knew this, but I had forgotten it until today. There are 2 kinds of sins that you can commit. Anybody want to guess what they are? 2 types of sins that a Catholic can commit. And I'm not going to get into the Latin names. One of them is a deadly sin. I mean, it's got a big Latin word, but it's a big one. I mean, it's a big, big sin. And if you die before you get to confession, you may not get to go to heaven because you committed a major sin and didn't confess it before you died. The other one are less serious sins. You don't really have to confess them, but it's a good idea. When you go into the confession, if you committed adultery, murder, some of those major, major sins, you got to confess it or you don't get to heaven. The other one is like, I stole a Coke out of the Coke machine. You're not going to hell because of that, but they do encourage you to confess it. So that's confession. And you need to go to confession regularly. The next one is the last rites. And I checked and double checked. Last rites come before marriage. Don't ask me why, but they have the last rites listed before marriage. Have you ever, and I know most of you probably have not, have you ever seen last rites administered? just movies. When I was with the police, and I was, we have a death, can you go? I would go and find the family, find out some circumstances. If they were Catholic and they asked me to, and if they didn't ask, I didn't have to, but if they asked me, I was required to call a Catholic priest. Or actually, I would call dispatch. They would call the Catholic priest. That was one of the laws that was set up, as even a police officer, if he was there and they were Catholic, he had to offer to call a Catholic priest. So I was dispatched to a home, got there, and, I'm talking to them, had prayer, different things with them, and they said, can you call a Catholic priest for us? So I get my phone, called dispatch, and in, a few minutes, Catholic priest was there. Officially, my job was finished. But I thought, I'm going to stay and watch. So I got way back over in the corner and watched him do last rites. Don't ask me how on earth that gets them into heaven. I mean, it was something that I'm glad I saw once, but I cannot believe that people actually think that gets them into heaven. It was, we're streaming. I will be very nice. But if you keep the last rites and then marriage, they discourage not being married. And then it's not in here, but it's understood in marriage. It's understood by getting married, you're going to have as many children as possible. That's why many Catholics have 6, 8, 10, 12 kids, because that's part of marriage, and that helps them get a little bit closer to heaven. And then the final step, which is only for a very few people, is ordination. That's the last step, and when you take that one, you are guaranteed heaven, but you then become a father so-and-so. You then become a priest or work your way on up. You could be a deacon, but ordination is the final straw that gets you into heaven. That's what they actually believe. Some churches ignore baptism altogether. You walk down the aisle. In fact, I know of a church, you don't even have to walk down the aisle. Just tell the preacher on the way out, I want to be a member. Okay, you're a member. That's it. No church vote, no baptism, no anything. You're a member. In fact, we ran into a church a few years ago. All you had to do was attend for 4 Sundays or something. If you attended so many Sundays, you were automatically a member. Didn't have to do anything. So baptism obviously was not very important. But even a casual look at the baptism of Jesus. Wow, time is up. Y'all want to go for another 30 minutes or? Okay. All right. He said it'll be